The first of our scriptures is taken from Genesis, the 18th chapter, the first 15 verses. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground and said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife Sarah?" And he said, "Here in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 years old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, "God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me." And she said, "Who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his own old age."
Thank you, Paul. Our gospel reading, Jesus has been moving through the crowds, teaching and healing. And we come to Matthew 9:35 through 10:1 and verse 10:16. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogue and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest." Then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples, gave them authority over unclean spirits and to cast them out, and to cure every disease and every sickness. Jesus said to them, "See, I am sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." The word of God for the people of God. Here we go. So here is some amazing math only God could be behind. There were 25 years between the time when Abraham and Sarah, called Abram and Sarai, were first contacted by God and were first told about the covenant with God. 25 years between that moment and the birth of Isaac. How many of you excel at the art and skill of waiting? Any good waiters out there? And I don't mean the type that bring you food. Yeah, in the Eber family, all waiting is converted automatically into reading time. The one time I went to Toys R Us on Black Friday, I read in the checkout line, and there were people talking about how brilliant I was. My kids were the only ones in Disney who read books while waiting in line for rides. I was not the parent going, "Stop climbing on that. It'll be a minute." Just pulled out the books, and there they went. This was obviously before I allowed them to have cell phones. We Ebers always carry a book because you never know when you're going to have to wait. And God forbid we just wait. It's not our thing. But Abraham and Sarah didn't get to carry around too many books, and there was no Disney to vacation at. What was their life like? Here's a list of their life events, or at least the start of a list. Between chapter 15 of Genesis, where they first encounter God, and chapter 21, when Isaac is born. Chapter 15 of Genesis, they establish the covenant with God. God makes the covenant with Abraham, promising him countless descendants in the land of Canaan, going to be all yours. And of course, God, being God, sealed it by splitting open animals and having Abraham walk through them. God likes a good sealing of the covenant. Then this wonderful covenant is followed by a traveling vacation of types. Actually, their new life is you leave home and become a nomad. From chapters 12 to 24 in Genesis, Abraham travels extensively throughout the land, beginning his primary journey of faith, like I said, in 12, and doesn't really pause too long until 24. His migration spans multiple chapters as he responds to divine calls, famines, and conflicts, almost like a superhero. My favorite preacher, Barbara Brown Taylor, said in her sermon titled Late Bloomer from her book, Gospel Medicine, she says, God said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred. And Abraham had gone, taking everything he owned except a map. Well, I showed you a map, but we all know Abraham didn't have a map because there wasn't one, she wrote. Their only map, Barbara Brown Taylor said, is God's voice. And he and his wife Sarai learned to live by God's voice. Though it led them down to Egypt and back again, they simply learned to recognize the tug inside of them when it came, as if God held the end of a delicate thread stitched lightly through their hearts. And they learned to follow it, its lead, without having to know where or what or why. That's why she's my favorite preacher. A delicate thread stitched lightly through their hearts. Then you have, after all of this moving around and in the midst of it, in chapter 16, after growing impatient, waiting just 10 out of the 25 years, we have the whole Hagar surrogate debacle. and all that brings, and Abraham and all the confusion of having a child, Ishmael, born, but if it's not Sarah's. Keep in mind that when Ishmael was born, Abraham was 86 years old. I don't know about you guys, but this plan God has laid out is not my idea of a retirement plan. Okay? And then you go on to a name change and circumcision in Genesis 17. God appears to the 99-year-old Abraham to reaffirm the covenant. He changes their names officially, and God institutes circumcision as a sign of a covenant. Yes, you get that correctly. God makes Abraham show his faith by being circumcised at age 99. Not only that, but all the males that are traveling with him must submit to circumcision. I'm sure that was just a wonderful day. And when he changed their names had meaning that seemed almost like a joke to Abraham and Sarah. Abraham translates father of a multitude of nations. And Sarah translates kings of people shall come from her. That's the name they had to accept, although they were frustrated and did not understand. Next, there's what's called the deception at Gerar in chapter 20. Fearing for his life, Abraham lies to King Abimelech, passing Sarah off as his sister without consulting God on what would be best. And God, luckily for them, intervenes, and Abraham and Sarah are somehow extracted very carefully by God, and they go away safely with gifts instead of being, killed for lying to a king. And then it goes on there, you have the birth of Isaac. God fulfills his promise, finally, and Sarah gives birth to their son Isaac at the time when Abraham is 100, and Isaac is circumcised at 8 days old in fulfillment of the covenant. You have the exiling of Hagar and Ishmael in Genesis 21. After a feast of Isaac's weaning, Sarah sees Ishmael playing, and she demands Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael. Distressed, Abraham goes to God, and God says, go ahead, cast them out. Do as Sarah says, I'll handle it. Abraham trusted God, and God came through. And then finally, the 100-year-old Abraham brokers a treaty and negotiates a peace treaty with King Elimelech and resolves the dispute, and he settles down to plant a tamarisk tree and call on the name of the Lord. I'm exhausted just going through the list. And think about it, 25 years just since when the promise was made. People were laughing at Abraham and Sarah. 25 years seems like a lot for us. But to Abraham and Sarah, I think basically what you have here is God sees 25 years as the blink of an eye. Hard for us to picture. So let's stop moving along and trying to put it in order, and let's enter the one scene that we read about today. The moment depicted in today's reading and depicted in this picture that I spoke about first a couple of weeks ago. Abraham is at the Oaks of Mamre, located somewhere in what is now modern-day Hebron. Abraham sees the three men approaching, and something tugging like a little string in his heart tells him that those three men coming are the Lord. The word Trinity had never been used, but somehow that string tells him. And Abraham goes out to meet the Lord and invites the Lord in. This is Andrei Rublev's icon called the Trinity. Something inside of Abraham makes him seat the Trinity down and feed them a feast and offer them hospitality. Sarah, like any self-respecting wife, listens at the tent flap. That's how women of her age learned information. They weren't invited into the room. But I think it was assumed that the woman in charge would be somewhere around and would be hearing the story. And so after 25 years, the whole problem with Hagar, all the moving around, she hears that she's going to be pregnant, and she laughs to herself. Not audibly, She's not supposed to be in the room. She laughs to herself, and yet the Trinity can hear her. She laughs and says, after I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure? And God, being God, calls her out. Sarah denies it because she didn't hear herself laugh out loud. And she basically says, I didn't do it. Well, she did do it, and I think it was a natural thing to do. What do you do when you get information that just doesn't make sense to you? You pause, you wonder, you might laugh nervously, you might try to wrestle with it. I keep seeing a cartoon, maybe along the line of The Far Side, and it's a picture of Sarah's brain, and the words that keep coming out of it is does not compute, does not compute, does not compute. I got to have a baby now. I feel her laughter was her body releasing this confusion and stress at what she could not understand. We can know that the God is a God of great love and compassion, and that's the God who created the covenant. But we can still be overwhelmed. And that's where we have to fall back on the knowledge that our God is a God who creates, and try to just follow. American-Israeli multimedia artist Yael Harris-Resnick and I had an email conversation this week about this picture. I thought it was beautiful. It's called Sarah Laughed. Quoting Yael's website, she wrote, in the religious world, there is an abundance of art featuring rabbis and men, while women are erased in silence. There is no better time to showcase the beauty of strong Jewish females. And the website goes on to say, Yael's work captures the ancient raw emotion of Jewish history while maintaining a relevant vibrancy of modern times. So looking at that picture, what's the first word that comes to your mind? Just call them out. Beautiful. Joy. Go ahead. I'm not going on yet. What? Relief. She's letting it out. Vibrancy. Color. To me, Yael has captured both the moment outside the tent at Mamre in Genesis 18:12 and the moment of Genesis 21:6, where Sarah cries out, God has brought me laughter. I started to think, was this image too young to be Sarah? But then I started to think, what does laughter do to us? Laughter can change us. This is the moment when it all came together for Sarah, in my mind. What came together is she doesn't have to understand. She has to remember to trust in the covenant of God. God has brought me laughter, she said when she saw the baby. She is actually the artist with vibrant color and raw, unedited motion, summed up Sarah's whole experience. The irony that you think you know where you're going, and you think you know what today and tomorrow is going to be like, only to find out that God has a whole different interpretation. And while you want to be faithful to God, you're not really all that thrilled about God pulling out the rug from under you. But Sarah laughed. Not at first. It wasn't a great laugh. But her laughter grew and changed in reason and form, and changed her and changed all of us. Sarah, Abraham, and us, the descendants of the covenant, live in what Barbara Brown Taylor calls the grip of a promise. That's what we live in, the grip of a promise, and a divine promise at that, a promise from God. Our brain does not fully understand God, But we go forward without a map. But can we look for that tug in our heart? An attempt and respond to the tug with an attempt at human compassion, human obedience. And we can stumble along following God's plan, even if we don't understand. We can go forward in God's plan, even though 3 steps forward may mean 2 steps back before you go forward again, because you're still stepping in the promise of God. God promises us that if we have the courage to live in the grips of a promise, that God will be with us in good times and bad. The presence of the Trinity will show up. And our laughter can go from being ironic and internal to being the expression of the full covenant. Can we live in the grip of a promise without having a map? Amen.